Welcome to the Faith and Global Engagement McDonald Distinguished Public Lecture tonight. And it's a delight to see all of you. Seeing some people that we've seen at many of our lectures, some new. It's just a delight to have you. We've been praying about the rain, and it seems like it held off, and so we're here. So it's going to be a good night. We're looking tonight at how to lead in a chaotic world. So as you were coming in this evening, the music you were hearing, what was the music? Beethoven, Beethoven, the Ninth Symphony and the Fourth Movement. And so our founding director, Professor Daniel Chua, who's also the head, yes, let's hear it for him. And he's the head of the Department of Music, so he also gets to choose our music for all the speakers coming in. But this is, I'm told, May 7th, the 200th anniversary of the Ninth Symphony, of when it was performed. I actually spent some time in Bonn, where Beethoven was born, so we heard this a lot. But it starts with this really chaotic noise, and then it begins to change into something which is this ode to joy, which we were hearing now a little bit at the end. But going from this chaos leading into this beautiful harmony and peace. And in fact, some of the words based on Schiller's poet, where he calls out for harmony and calls out for peace. So faith and global engagement, one of the things we do, or kind of in the name, is that we say, how does our faith engage global issues? And this is definitely a global issue of just chaos and a feeling of chaoticness in our world today. And so what we're going to have tonight is just be blessed with a wonderful guide in the person of Dr. Michael, and he will be with us tonight. He's the president of Taylor University. And so Michael Lindsay, he's president of Taylor University. Before that, he was the president of Gordon, and before that, he was at Rice University. But basically an accomplished sociologist and also an accomplished educator. Some of the books he has written, one of the books he wrote was called Faith in the Halls of Power. Faith in the Halls of Power. And that book actually was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in nonfiction. But there's other books he's written. One of the books that we talked about on Saturday night, he got a chance to talk with our students, about 500 of our 500 students who are in our character leadership program. And as he was sharing with them, he was sharing some of the lessons he's learned from two of his other books. One is The View from on Top. And The View from the Top is basically a book of 550 individual interviews that Michael did personally over 10 years with people from the 2 United States presidents, from 20% of the CEOs in the Fortune 100 companies, from all types of distinguished government leaders, looking at what really the secrets are of leadership. Now tonight, obviously, he's going to be talking a little bit more directly about not only just leadership in general, but how do we lead in this VUCA world? How do we lead in a world where we feel this chaos all around us? And as he does so, then we want to make this more of a communal, kind of a community discussion, right? So it's not just one way coming from the stage, but really to hear from you. So as he's talking, as he's going through, be getting your questions ready, because then after he's finished, then we're going to have a little Q&A time where we want to hear from you in terms of what are your questions in this particular topic, and also maybe some suggestions that you might have as we have this exchange between faith and global engagement and then also the community as a whole. Sound good? Okay, so that's where we are. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's give a really warm welcome to Dr. Michael Lindsay.
Great honor to be here. Thank you so very much for the warm welcome. I'm excited to be able to share with you tonight a little bit of my research. And I want to talk about leading in a VUCA world. This is an interesting concept. I had a chance to interview a number of different leaders. This is Colin Powell, who served as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the chief military officer in the U.S. military, and then later was named the Secretary of State. He's a very intimidating man. I went in to go do my interview with General Powell, and he was running a little bit late, so he came out into the lobby and he said, "Michael, I need 5 or 10 minutes and I'll be right with you." And then later he called me back into his office, and we were gathered around a small little coffee table, probably not much bigger than this. And Colin Powell, he broad shoulders, big guy, and he has this sort of tendency of when he sees you, he sort of locks eyes with you. And so that's kind of what he does for the whole conversation. Now you think, that's okay because eventually he's going to look away, but no, he never does. He just keeps looking at you. General Powell said, "You know, Michael, I read all the material that you sent to me before the interview, and I don't know how to tell you this because I know you've been working on this for a long time, but I pretty much find this research project on leadership you've been working on, it seems pretty much worthless to me." That's his opening line. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind to say, "Well, that's interesting, General Powell, say more." And for the next 5 minutes, while staring me down, he berated me. He said, "You know, first off, you make this claim that I'm a leader. I don't think my wife sees me as a leader. I don't think my kids see me as a leader. So, you know, what's to say I'm actually a leader? And even if I was a leader, how are you going to, in the course of an hour-long interview, actually figure out what works in my life and what makes me a distinctive leader? And even if you could figure that out in just an hour, what's to say that what you learned from me could be applicable to other people?" He said, "You made a big point in your letter about how it was such a big deal that I was a White House fellow." He said that wasn't a big deal. It was just, you know, one among many years. He went on and on and on. And meanwhile, I'm feeling smaller and smaller and smaller. Finally, I said, "You know, General Powell, I hear what you're saying, but I'm just wondering, how do you reconcile with what you're saying here with what you wrote in your autobiography," which I read cover to cover. And I distinctly remember you talking about the relationship you had with Frank Carlucci. You formed that relationship in the 1 year when you were a White House fellow. You worked in his office as he was the director of the Office of Management and Budget. Now, true, it was just 1 year, but it was a very pivotal year because Carlucci took a personal interest in you after leaving that office. So much so that in 1981, when he was named National Security Advisor by President Reagan, he handpicked you to be his deputy national security advisor, a very unusual move for a relatively junior military officer to be named the deputy national security advisor. Powell said, "Well, yeah, but then we, did lots of other things." And I said, "Yes, I remember in 1985 when Carlucci stepped down from that job. James Baker, Howard Schultz, a number of other people were lobbying President Reagan to choose somebody else as the national security advisor. But it was Carlucci who put in the good word with President Reagan that you ought to be selected, which was a job you actually got in 1985. Through that, you formed a close relationship with the Vice President, George H.W. Bush, over those 4 years, so much so that in 1989, when he was elected president, he named you to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a role that you held during the first Gulf War. Through that, you developed a very close relationship, not only with President Bush, with the entire Bush family, because I remember you went to Kennebunkport in Maine many times during that war. Through that, you developed a relationship with George W. Bush, who, when he ran for president, he tapped you to be an informal advisor on foreign policy. An unusual move for a military officer to be basically a chief foreign affairs advisor, so that when George W. Bush was elected president, he actually chose you to be his Secretary of State, a role that you've said many times is your most distinguished honor of your career. As I look at it, General Powell, being a White House fellow wasn't just a year, it was the year it changed your life. He said, "Maybe you got a point, we'll do the interview." What I learned is that Colin Powell's tendency is a little bit to intimidate folks who come to see him, even if they've come to do an interview. But he taught me an important lesson about how it is that you deal with the challenges of leadership. Another person I had a chance to meet was Wesley Clark, who served as the Supreme Allied Commander for NATO forces. A Rhodes Scholar early on in his career, had a number of different achievements and accomplishments, but particularly was involved in NATO in the late 1990s when the Balkans conflict was ongoing. Both of these individuals, as well as a number of other folks, talked to me about the way in which the U.S. military sort of coined this phrase to describe the new environment in which leadership must exist today. They characterize it as a VUCA world, V-U-C-A. We live in a world that is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This means that traditional means of warfare really don't apply, but traditional means of management and leadership also do not apply. So we have to think about, what does it mean to exist within a VUCA world? Let's start by talking about the volatility that we experience. From the global pandemic of coronavirus to the mass migration we see around the world, to erupting social protests. We live in a world of great volatility. There's an interesting idea that really originated with B.F. Skinner's idea of behavioralism, which has been the only proven method to help people to deal with the challenge of anxiety. Anxiety is actually something that grips the lives of a variety of people, including a number of different leaders. Cognitive behavioral therapy is basically the idea of trying to rewire the neurons in your brain. It's basically saying we need to create new synapses so that the triggers that cause anxiety in your life don't have a debilitating effect. And cognitive behavioral therapy can actually be used to help people to manage the challenges and the issues that they face. Because this is a faith and global engagement lecture, obviously matters of faith and faith disciplines and practices can be particularly helpful. Going all the way back to the Desert Fathers of the early church history, we see practices like contemplative prayer and meditation can be ways in which you master the art of what today psychologists would call cognitive behavioral therapy. Basically, helping you to attend to the present moment so that the past and the future do not have a debilitating impact on your life. So this kind of idea has proven to be extremely effective, and I found a number of different folks who have used this to good measure. It's interesting, I went to go see an executive coach in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is the home of Harvard and MIT. And he showed me a practice. He would attach a device to his patient's earlobe that would allow him to be able to measure a whole variety of biometrics. And in that, he would help to guide his client to think about the different stressors that they were experiencing, but then also helping them to get to a place of contemplative relaxation so that they could let go of some of those anxieties. And he said, the real challenge is that when you are in the midst of these anxious thoughts, to be able to step back so that the volatility of the moment does not become overpowering in your life. So much of what we see, the big, great challenges of our world, actually what really becomes debilitating is when we internalize that volatility and it becomes part of our own experience. And so the challenge of leadership is how that you navigate the volatility. You can't control the world, but you can control how you respond to the world. That's one of the great insights that I found over the course of my study. Of course, there are many different examples from Scripture of admonishing us to think about how we can navigate the volatility in the world around us. This particular passage from 1 Peter 3, it's really encouraging us to set apart in our minds the person of Christ. So here, one of the practical ideas, which has been proven throughout the millennia of church history, is that you can actually use practices to help reorient your mind. So a common refrain of Jesus Christ, Lord and Savior, has been one of the ways in which the faithful have recited the name of Jesus in moments of anxiety, which actually has proven to have a very calming effect on their lives, and even in moments of great leadership challenge. So thinking about these practices and how they can actually come to set apart, I found the writings of Eugene Peterson to be very helpful. One of the things that Eugene Peterson, who helped write a new translation of the Bible called The Message, one of the things that he said is that the challenge is that no matter your job, whether you're working in government or business, whether you're a leader in your home or your community, is that we are consumed with busyness. That busyness consumes us, and it creates this environment where you don't even have time to stop and rest. And he says even within the world of the church, that the volume of business that you see in religion, which he later calls busyness, outruns the spiritual capital of its leaders. It is only by making daily deposits of spiritual capital that we develop through our own religious practices. Only by doing that do you actually build up sort of a degree of capital that you can withdraw from in moments of crisis or challenge. One of the things, I serve as a university president, so I get a chance to work with amazing students every year. My colleague Noah has a table out in the lobby with some information. We have a great new Ph.D. program in leadership for folks taking classes online. We'd love some folks from Hong Kong who might be interested. But one of the things that I love about my working with students at Taylor is that it's a great season of life to help young people develop habits and practices in their life that they can cultivate. And simple disciplines like good nutrition and exercise, daily prayer, and reading scripture can be practices that can build spiritual capital that you can withdraw from later on when the challenges might come. These are all ways that we can respond to volatility. A second dimension of the VUCA world in which we live is the uncertainty we see all around us. Like storm clouds that are coming, the uncertainty is one of the great challenges because we oftentimes don't know where the next challenge will emerge. In my own field of higher education, we have found there are a whole variety of challenges. For us, one of the issues is the uncertainty around enrollment and demographics. Hong Kong is already experiencing this. It's an interesting development of how much of the highly developed world is experiencing birth declines in rapid degree. Japan probably has the sharpest decline that we've seen of major industrialized countries, but it's true here in Hong Kong. It's true in my home country of the US. And that has a profound impact because it reshapes virtually all of the way we think about building businesses or serving nonprofits or organizations. And for us, thinking around those kinds of issues are quite challenging. In my own context, it seems like every month there is a story of another university that is closing because of low enrollments. And that's very difficult because institutions have their own degree of history, donors who have given money to those institutions for decades, students who are loyal alumni. They love their institutions, and yet if you don't have enough students, it's causing a realignment. We've seen this in virtually every industry of the marketplace. Global journalism and media companies would be some of the latest examples of that, but it's happening in every area. Consolidation is a reality of what we face. And because of that, it creates a great deal of uncertainty along the way. Well, there are many different examples, but one thing that I would say has proven to be helpful in my own journey is this Psalm 37. When I was faced with a series of challenges, so a few years ago, I had a very strong premonition, a very strong inclination that I was being called to step away from a job that I loved and one that I would have for the rest of my life. I was serving as a president of a Christian liberal arts college on the North Shore of Boston called Gordon College. And over a series of very specific intuitions and moments, I got the sense that I was being called to step away from that job, really in part out of an act of obedience. And I don't know if you've ever had a sense of calling that you're supposed to do something that's very hard to do. This was very hard for me to do because I thought I was really giving up a way of life. I loved being a university president. I felt like I was uniquely skilled in doing it, and I didn't want to give up a job or a lifestyle that I had come to love. I remember specifically, I had taken my leadership team to a retreat in the mountains of New Hampshire. It was July of 2020. So we were just beginning to emerge out of the emergency phase of COVID-19. And at that point in time, most of the universities in Boston were going to reopen. And so we were in the process of building our reopening protocols. And I had assembled my team for a couple days retreat. We sat at tables that were 6 feet apart and were masked and all those protocols that we had to follow. And the last night we had a dinner. The sun was setting. It was a beautiful evening. And I was sort of presiding over the group as they were affirming one another, colleagues saying what they appreciated about one another. And as I stood there, I heard this very distinct voice. It wasn't audible, but I definitely heard it. And it was simply, Michael, this is the best leadership team Gordon has ever assembled, and it's okay for you to pass the baton to someone else. I went up into my hotel room that evening and I just wept deeply because I thought, this job that I love is being taken away from me, and I can't imagine what I'm going to do. Over the next 2 months, my wife and I prayed and eventually reached the conclusion that, in fact, we should step away from that job. So I went to my board and told them that this would be my last academic year. I had never stepped away from a job without having another job, so this was new for me. But I sensed that if it was the right calling, that God would provide something for me. My wife and I found a lot of comfort in the writings of Psalm 37. Don't be fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong, for like the grass they will soon wither, like green plants they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy a safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He'll make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. For 6 months, my wife and I would take a walk. Sometimes it would be just for 5 or 10 minutes. Other times it would be for an hour. We would pray aloud and we would meditate on that particular psalm. Psalm 37 is actually known as the meekness psalm. It is the psalm that Jesus alludes to in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." It's from Psalm 37 that he's quoting. And I thought it was an appropriate psalm for someone who was applying for jobs, to be reminded to be meek and humble, even as I was trying to find what would come next. And through the process of that, I began to see that some of the uncertainty that I felt in the wider world no longer had the same kind of grip over my emotions, that I didn't feel quite so paralyzed as I have before. There is something comforting about reading the words of Scripture that can help us to navigate the uncertainty that we see all around us. I also used it as an occasion to begin to think about what were those sources of delight in my role and what were ones that I hoped to be able to experience. This is a picture of Cranes Beach, 6 miles of pristine beach on the North Shore of Boston. It was just a couple of miles away from my home. And I would have the chance to go and walk that beach, go back and forth, pray and think a lot. And I will say one of the things that I began to realize is that having a physical place where I could commune with God was one of the things that I really loved about my job, and that would be important to me. I began keeping a regular account. I call it a gratitude journal, where every day I write down 3 things for which I'm grateful. Sometimes they're pretty mundane issues, like I'm grateful I had a great dessert for lunch today, or I'm grateful that my twin daughters did not fight all night. Oftentimes that's something to give thanks for. But also it could be really significant things. But having a way of keeping a regular account of things I'm grateful for, and then having a chance to go back and see that by looking back, that is a way of also reminding us of how God had sustained me through a number of different things, became ways in which I was able to deal with the uncertainty of the future. Complexity is the third dimension of a VUCA world. And one of the things that I would say is a great challenge that all of us face is that whenever we are in positions of responsibility or leadership, we're always navigating many different constituents. In my job as a university president, I want to try and please and serve my faculty and staff. They are the employees who are the carriers of our mission. They live it out every single day. I, of course, want to be able to help serve and bless my students, those that have come to my institution that we love. Through the recruitment process, we've wooed them to come and be part of our institution. Then we admit them. Now we want them to thrive while they're here. I also have trustees that I work for on my board of directors. We have donors and supporters, alumni who are external constituents we have to care for. I have accrediting agencies and regulators that speak into the situation. I deal with the media a great deal in my job, as well as lawmakers who have regulations around us. There's a great deal of complexity. One of those moments that I faced was while I was serving as a president of Gordon College, where a group of people began to really oppose Gordon for its set of convictions around a traditional sexual ethic. Tonight, I'm not here to talk about human sexuality, but I wanted to use it as a case study to just talk about the challenges that we face when the full story is not presented. Because oftentimes in leadership, you don't have the freedom to give the full story. Why is that? Because oftentimes leaders understand there are lots of human dynamics, and oftentimes there are rivalries, competitions, conflicts, where perhaps both parties are partially right and both parties are partially wrong. And you're trying to adjudicate among those competing demands. Or you're dealing with sensitive personnel matters. And you don't have the freedom to be able to speak out. Why? Because institutions are always more bound by obligations than individuals. And the problem is that when you're the president, you don't get to speak as an individual. You only speak on behalf of the institution. That's the tough thing about leadership. You can never say exactly what is on your mind. And you always have to be the most mature person in the room. And I hate that. I hate it because sometimes I just want to really speak my mind. Sometimes I really want to say, hey, I went to you 4 times and asked for you to do this nicely. And on the 5th time, I had to say, if you don't do it, it's not going to work out for you to stay here. Now you're upset, but if you would have just been nice one of the first 4 times, we could have avoided this particular step. Or one of the difficult things is, you know what this would be a common refrain. I'll have a parent that will contact us who is irate about a situation that their student is found themselves in. And what I want to say to them is that you're not angry at me for holding your child accountable. You are angry at your child who has done something stupid. And because of that, you're embarrassed. And you're trying to get out of your embarrassment by deflecting and making it about anger toward me or the institution. When in fact, you're really grieving what has happened with your own family. That's what I want to say. But I never can say that. This is the complexity of leadership. Now, it's part of what makes leading so fulfilling because it is rarely a matter of black and white. Very rarely. Things do not get to the leader's desk because they are black and white. They are always a shade of gray, which means you have to be able to have a degree of comfort with that complexity and be able to say, okay, how could I respond in this situation? And how can I take the different elements that I'm facing and respond in a way that speaks to my values and my core convictions? While I was facing this particular issue at Gordon College, one of the things that I found very difficult is that as a leader, even though you need to be able to give targeted messages to different constituents, you never had the advantage of only speaking to one audience at a time. So that when you were speaking, you're being heard by multiple people. And it's very difficult to speak to your students as well as your parents, as well as your donors, as well as the media, in a way that all 4 of those groups hear the same basic message, but in a way that they embrace. Because oftentimes they don't like things the same way. They don't like to be able to respond in the same dimension. And you may assume that you're speaking privately. You're having a private phone call, or you send a private email, or you're having a one-on-one conversation. When in fact, it very well could be you're being tape recorded. It very well could be you're being transcribed, as I've had both of those things happen in my life. That is the complexity that we face. And it's only gotten worse because human nature is combined by a mix of virtue and vice. These are my daughters, Emily and Caroline. Twin daughters, have 99.9% of the same DNA, born into the same family with the same parents, have lived in the same houses, had the same experiences for all 14 years, and yet they can be as different as night and day. And they are human, which means sometimes they are wonderful angels and do everything we would want. And other times, not so much. And so because of that, because that complexity exists in every student's life, in every person's life, you realize that you're always having to navigate the complexity of both the demons and the angels in their human nature. You can be in authority and have power. but you cannot be a leader without followers. Because of that, leadership is fundamentally a relational engagement. It's fundamentally about relationships, which means those interpersonal relationships where you can be naughty or nice at the same moment in different ways, that complexity is what makes leadership so challenging, but also so energizing. Because really what you're wanting to do is to call out our better selves. You yourself are trying to be a better version of yourself than you were yesterday. And so that helps us to think about complexity. I just returned from taking my mother and my mother-in-law to Amsterdam. Both of our moms have wanted to go see the tulips in Holland in their peak, which happens every April. While there, we had a chance to go visit the Cory Tinboom house. Cory Tinboom was a young Protestant girl living in Haarlem, Netherlands, during the Nazi occupation of World War II. She and her family hid Jews who were in hiding from the Nazis. They were part of the Dutch resistance movement. And it turns out that the Nazis eventually found them out and came and raided their house and arrested Cory, who was a young woman, and her sister, Betsy, and their father, who was a watchmaker. And at Cory Tinboom's house, which you can go visit today, and it's a wonderful story of sort of Christian heroism in a very difficult time, standing up for the vulnerable and the oppressed in their own day, in their own context. There's this beautiful picture. On the left is the picture of the back cover of a seat. And what you see is the back first, which is all the different threads that look a little haphazard. When you turn it around, you see this beautiful crown design. But Cory had this idea that she said, I think it's better to pay attention to what's on the back side, because that's what you and I experience. We rarely see in ourselves or in one another the beautiful handiwork that God has made. Instead, we see all of the twists and tangles of the threads, the different colors that are mixed together. We see that as our reality. And she said, every experience God gives us, every person he puts in our lives is the perfect preparation for a future that only he can see. As those different threads are woven together, it may not look as beautiful as you would expect, but actually, in the redemptive work of God, it can become a beautiful creation. Even the saddest, the worst parts of our lives can be redeemed to be part of a beautiful mosaic that helps us to better understand our larger calling and purpose in life. And in fact, leadership is about helping people to see that the backside of their lives are part of what help make up the character so that you can experience the front side of their lives. That the two things are not divorced, but they're actually intimately connected one to another. So Cory Tinboom developed this understanding as a 14-year-old girl. So much more so it can be applied in our own lives as we think about not only the volatility and uncertainty, but also the complexity of our life. And then finally, for a VUCA world, is the world of ambiguity. I spoke to the students on Saturday night about this guy, Mike Ullman. He's an interesting man because Mike has a debilitating medical condition that makes it very difficult for him to walk. And he is in physical pain most every minute of his life. Mike was tapped to be the global managing director of LVMH, the luxury goods conglomerate based in Paris, owned by Bernard Arnault, the richest man in the world. And Mike had been the CEO of Macy's before he moved here in Hong Kong and helped build the business that we now know as duty-free shopping, DFS. Mike is the guy who helped invent that business. And he was hired by Bernard Arnault because Bernard saw him as a person of trust and who would be able to speak with honesty. Mike told me an interesting story. When he got to LVMH, it's about 150 different brands that are united under one large conglomerate, but it's very hard to bring together 150 different corporate cultures and how it is that you might sort of find ways to work together. So they hired a set of consultants to help them to identify what was it that was distinctive about the LVMH organizational culture. And he said, do you know what was the number one attribute of LVMH's corporate culture? Ambiguity. He said, who organizes a culture around ambiguity? What does that even mean? And he said, but actually what we learned is that the creative industries oftentimes have a deeper appreciation for ambiguity. Why? Because artists tend to be able to hold together opposing ideas in tension. That ambiguity is actually what allows creators to be able to add value. It's how they are able to take something and see it with a slightly different twist. And because things can have ambiguous meaning, it actually creates sort of an ethereal nature, and they become elusive. And it is that elusive nature of luxury goods that make them desirable. So actually the very thing that causes the marketplace to say, oh, I really want this particular handbag, or I want this kind of scarf, actually that also helps create the kind of culture that builds this ambiguity throughout the culture of the organization. Claude Lévi-Strauss, French anthropologist, had this idea of bricolage. It is the piecing together of disparate ideas. And Lévi-Strauss says that basically those people who are successful over the long haul are people that he calls bricoleurs. A bricoleur is somebody who is good at improvisation. Someone who is able to take disparate ideas or elements and piece them together in some creative combination. Leadership today is largely about being a bricoleur. It is the process of saying, how do I bring together these different elements that seemingly are disparate, but somehow they need to be able to come together? And having a degree of comfort with ambiguity is a fundamental idea of leadership, because we live in an environment where oftentimes it's hard to see those bright lines. You're having to be able to make a variety of choices. So bricoleurs are the ones who are able to piece these different elements that are together. Now, part of that is helping people to put forward their best version of themselves. It's interesting, we live in a day and age that really applauds authenticity. And yet, social media is probably the least authentic thing in the world. I was walking yesterday morning along the Avenue of the Stars on Kowloon, and there were these young people who were out taking posed photos. They would have a friend sort of taking, and they were doing the most unusual poses in these pictures, that I think they were trying to sort of make themselves look casual and at ease, you know, with the Hong Kong skyline behind them. And yet it felt the most inauthentic version of these young people. That there's this sort of stylized version of ourselves that we're trying to project, when in fact, it seems to me that the world is just hungry for people who can be honest and who can speak the truth. Part of the challenge of living in a world of ambiguity is that we're not even sure who's real or who's not. And in the emerging world of artificial intelligence, so much of what we're wondering is this email actually written by a person, or is it just some stylized AI-generated message that I'm somehow supposed to think it's written by someone, when in fact it's inauthentic? Larry Bacow was the president of Harvard. Prior to that, he served as the president of Tufts. I got to know him through the course of my research. Larry does something very interesting. He does not have a signature box on his email replies, and he would always sign his emails, "Regards, Larry." And he said, I worked very hard that my emails were never longer than a paragraph. He said, that's how people knew it came from me. Otherwise, they would think that it was our communications vice president or a media advisor who had composed it. But if they were 3 sentences, they would know, oh no, that's Larry. And that's how I would speak. Part of what we want to try and do in an ambiguous world is to tout the very best version of ourselves. So that's part of that bricolage effort of what we are developing. So one of the things that I came to the conclusion over the course of my study of how we think about living in a VUCA world, characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, is that God does equip those that he calls. And so part of what our job is to just be attentive to what is God calling us to do, and how might we live into that best version of ourselves? It's not about getting everything right, but it's instead a process of trying to take stock of where God has led us to this point, and with honesty and sincerity to try and communicate that and to bring people along. I'm having a bit of a test of this at this very moment. The worst thing is having to give a speech about something and then being required to live it out yourself. And I'm experiencing that right now. So I serve as the president of a university. It's Monday. On Friday, at my university in Upland, Indiana, I'll be welcoming about 1,000 of our most significant supporters of the university, people who have made donations and been volunteer leaders at the institution, because we are launching the public phase of a major fundraising campaign. Now, we've been very successful over the last few years, so successful that when we launch this campaign on Friday, it will already be the largest campaign of a Christian university in the United States ever undertaken. So that we're really excited about. But the question is, what should be the future goal? How much do we build our projections based on past successes? We have had 3 very unusual years. 3 years ago, we raised $27 million. That was double the average we would raise in a single year. Then, 2 years ago, we raised $65 million, double what we had done the year before, 4 times what would be a usual year for us. And at this point, in this fiscal year, we have basically gotten to a place where we have doubled what we did last year. Well, that is crazy. I mean, no one does that. And so I do not expect in any way that this trend will continue. But what I don't know is this a process that's going to get significantly smaller next year, or is it going to be returned to a steady state? I have no idea. And the problem is that it's my job to choose a number. And so on Friday, I have to announce to the world what our goal is going to be. And I am telling you the truth, at this very moment, I'm still not sure what the goal should be. So I have been dealing with the volatility of my own emotions because I go and see a donor who tells me about what they want to do, and it's a really big number. And of course, I'm very excited, and so I think, oh, we should set a very big number. And then the next day, I go see a different donor, and they turn me down. And I think, oh, it's never going to be this good again. And the best days have passed us. I live in a world of great uncertainty because when you're setting a fundraising campaign, not only do you pay attention to people's generosity, but also world events. So we're seeing inflation continues to be an issue in our context. The global economy is very hard to predict right now. And we think about the world where there's so much conflict in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza. Those kind of conflicts can spill over into much larger conflicts that can have macroeconomic pressures. And so that could significantly influence the success of a campaign. Then I have to think about the complexity in which we live because I no longer can count on the same universe of donors I've used in the past. And I'm finding, for example, people who are in their 40s and 50s do not have the same way of giving as people who are in their 60s and 70s, much less people who are in their 20s. I have to have different campaigns for different decades of people who are alive. And what works for one person doesn't work for another person. That's very difficult to build a campaign in that way. And then I have to deal with the recognition of ambiguity. Because some people love the institution they went to, and others, they get frustrated with the institution. And we could do any number of things that could cause them to be happy or upset in the same moment. And a single tweet can end up being the undoing for the whole institution. We live in that kind of ambiguous world. So I'm trying to sort of figure out what should I do. So basic spiritual disciplines have become very important for me. I have found that volatility demands a degree of character, that there has to be a sense of groundedness in how we respond. Uncertainty requires both humility and meekness, like Psalm 37 points toward. Complexity requires us to demonstrate courage, much like Cory Tinboom and her family were willing to show during World War II, and that ambiguity, it draws out a degree of improvisation, like that bricolage that Claude Lévi-Strauss talks about, the improvisational kind of work that we have to do, where you piece together different elements and be able to see how your life can come together. We live in a VUCA world characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And yet, in the midst of that, I have found there's cause for great hope and encouragement, in part because I get to work every day with an amazing group of students who I'm very encouraged to be able to see how they are trying to develop the kind of character, to develop the kinds of skills and abilities, the values that they could live out every day that help to make a world so that although we are in a VUCA world, it can also be a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And yes, so now what we want to do is we want to invite you to be part of this conversation with us. So we're going to have a time of some question and answers, and Michael's agreed to kind of answer any questions here. Lots of particularly the complex ones and the ambiguous ones and all the other ones that are there, the uncertain ones. But I'm going to have just a general guidelines in terms of our questions so that we can involve as many people as we can. And so basically three criteria as we think about our questions. One is be articulate. These are the ABCs of our question time. So first of all, be articulate. And we'll have a mic here. We want to hear you. And so speak up when you're talking to the mic. Second is be brief, right? As brief as we are, the more questions we can get and the larger the conversation we can have together. And the C is be centered. Be centered. I'm sure you have all types of ideas that came up during Michael's talk, but be centered on what the talk is tonight, particularly in terms of how do we lead in this incredibly complex world. Sound good? And we have first person down here already. So if we can have a mic on the front row. And maybe if you could just tell us your first name as well, that would be helpful.
Yeah, my name is Albert, and I know Michael for many years.
Yeah, it's nice to see
I
you.
worked with him at Gordon College, and I'm inspired. And I shouldn't say that, but let me do that. I was recently, I don't think I notified you, I was recently appointed as the University Foundation Chairman. So what you talk about, donation really gives me a lot of things to think about. But in addition to that, I work on career for many years. In your VUCA world, I'm curious, how do you advise the students as they go out to the market to look for a job?
Yeah.
Do not look for a job, go for a master's degree or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, Albert. It's great to see you.
Albert.
Thank you for being here tonight. I think there's three things that I try to encourage all of our students to do to both prepare for and respond to a VUCA world. One is that I really believe that particularly for early jobs and early opportunities, employers are looking for breadth over depth. So the more that you can demonstrate facility with a broad spectrum of ideas or concepts or disciplines, the better you will be. Too much of higher education has become hyper-specialized and focused, when in fact, great emerging leaders are folks who have a liberal arts kind of mindset, and they can apply lots of different ideas. So it's very helpful for you to take courses and to be exposed to a wide range of disciplines, history and astronomy, to be able to know a little bit about literature and to also know about engineering. That breadth actually is very, very helpful, because most jobs that we do straight out of university are ones that you have to be trained in. You have to learn the discipline. Very few of us are hired because, oh, you mastered some domain of knowledge and that's going to make you very, very good in that field. No, most of us, you're hired because you have good capability and good potential. So breadth over depth is a very important concept. Second is the idea of developing this kind of improvisational skill. So having the ability to improvise, which means that you have to be able to pick up and learn things quickly and to be able to adapt in a very responsive kind of environment. So the more you can demonstrate to potential employers that you have the ability to respond very quickly to changing circumstances, because typically younger employees are the ones who are on the front lines of the changing pace of the institution. The people who are in the C-suite, who are in the real leadership position, things don't change for them very much. But those who are on the front lines, who are typically dealing with customers or constituents, they're oftentimes the ones who are closer to the changing dynamic of what is involved. And then the third thing that I think that you really have to develop, in addition to that sort of liberal arts mindset and the ability to improvise, is that you need to have a commitment to saying, I'll do whatever it takes early on. So there is no task that you're given that you're not willing to take on. There's no assignment that you're given that you're not willing to try and learn. And a lot of times that requires you to figure things out on your own. Fortunately, we live in a world of YouTube where you can pick up on a lot of key ideas, which can serve you really well. But that kind of mindset, I find that serves students the very best for early jobs to help them to thrive in the VUCA world.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Albert, for that question. Another question right here in the front as well. You know, when you were also talking, Mike, I was thinking also about, you know, obviously you mentioned AI, and that adds a whole nother complexity, particularly for our fresh graduates as they come out, because so many of those jobs during those first 2-3 years they would normally get are now changing dramatically for that.
Yep,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, that brick over. Yes.
Hello, I'm Sam. So I would like to ask a question is about, so when you mentioned about the liberal art mindset, so I was wondering, so given you mentioned like the previous context you mentioned about even like yourself running Golden University, you're facing around 12 or 20 stakeholders around that is already require a multifaceted cross-disciplinary trainings, and sometimes the learning curve that for that kind of training takes quite long.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, in this season, especially leading in such a world, is that what kind of position for education that we need to prepare? Are we now heading toward a slightly more polymorph and polyglot style training that we need to force people to be more quick learning, or is it the paradox is whether leading in a complex world, are we generating leaderships, or are we trying to building more knowledge to lead? There seems like two complexity at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good question, Sam. Here's an interesting statistic. 78% of the people that I interviewed out of the 550 people that were in the study, 78% of them had majored in a liberal arts field in their undergraduate degree. 78%. Why is it that the world's leaders have a liberal arts undergraduate training as opposed to a more technical or applied training? And I think it's because as you move up into leadership, it requires a broader understanding of many different issues. You no longer can be a specialist. There's a reason that we call the top military officers generals. They are generalists, so they have to be able to understand a broad spectrum of things. So in my own role, I'm a university president. So you would think that that's a very specialized job, but in a given day, I might have a meeting at 8 o'clock that deals with legal issues. At 9 o'clock, I have a meeting that talks about new academic programs. At 10 o'clock, I'm talking with our banker about strategic finance. At 11 o'clock, I'm dealing with HR and a personnel problem. At lunch, I'm hosting a group of scientific leaders who happen to be visiting who want to learn about some of the scientific research our faculty are doing. At 1 o'clock, I'm dealing with a group of student protesters who want to talk about the latest grievance that they have. You know, at 2 o'clock then, I'm trying to recruit somebody to come and join my administration. So in a given day, I have so many different domains of knowledge and so many different kinds of skills I have to draw upon. So it's not possible for me to be a specialist. I really have to rely upon my deputies to do that. And they are more the discipline domain-specific leaders. But as you move up, you have to develop that generalist mindset. Now you say, well, that applies if you're the CEO or the president. But actually, it applies if you're the vice president or the manager, because you're not doing a single job, you're overseeing a lot of different jobs. And the more you move up into leadership, the broader your horizon has to be. So what I think is very important is that you do eventually. So you start off in the working world where you have to just be able to do any number of different things. Then eventually you develop sort of, I'm kind of good at accounting. And so you begin to sort of move into that field. And maybe you become very good at forensic accounting. And then after you do forensic accounting, maybe you become an auditor working for the government who's trying to conduct forensic accounting on failed companies after they've left. So you're becoming quite specialized. And now let's say you're 32. But then there's an opportunity for you to move into management. And guess what? That management job is going to be a little bit broader than what you were doing previously. By the time you're 36, there's another promotion that allows you to go a bit broader. 38, you're even broader. By the time you're 40, you're not doing forensic accounting. You're overseeing a team of forensic accountants. And most of the time, they are not bringing to you the accounting questions. They're bringing to you the people questions. How do I deal with this jerk who's on my team? Or how do I respond to this difficult client? That's what you do. And so there's an interesting process where you start off with a degree of breadth, and then there's an hourglass effect where you begin to become quite specialized. But then as you progress in your career, you begin to broaden out again. That kind of experience, that sort of shape of your career, I found to be true for virtually everyone that I interviewed, that there is a give and take between that degree of specialization, but also generalization.
Sounds good. Good. Other questions? Have a question back here? Side? Matt over here. Candy. Question back there with Matt, and then one in the middle, Jonathan, right there. You go there. Thank you. So Matt, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Matthew. Thanks so much for this talk. My question is, how do you find time? You're president, you write books, you interview lots of people, and you have a family. And I mean, from what you said on Saturday, you have a special needs daughter.
Yes.
That takes a ton of time. And from what I'm hearing, you deal with a lot of people and stakeholders. That's a lot of one-on-one conversations. There's also group meetings. And then there's deep intellectual work when you're writing, which is a very different mood of thinking and being. How do you balance all that? What do you cut out?
I don't have a lot of hobbies. So I used to have hobbies, and I don't really now. And I would say I developed friendships and sustain friendships while working on things together. So some of those friendships are people that I work with. I serve on a number of different boards, and so I have friendships that are through that. And I find ways to sort of sustain them, but it's really different. In fact, my best friend, I live in the American Midwest. My best friend lives in California. And we have a standing call at 9 o'clock on Sunday nights. And we use it for first 15, 20 minutes just to catch up on each other. And then we share prayer requests and we pray for each other. And it's actually that weekly habit of talking to one another that we pretty much do wherever we are in the world and whatever's going on that has sort of sustained our friendship. But, I find that it is entirely possible to have a very engaged family life as a husband and a father, and to be in a very demanding job. You just don't have time to do a lot else. And so you have to prioritize. But I'm persuaded of the conviction that there is no workplace success that will make up for a family failure. So you really have to invest in those family commitments. And so there are times when I have to say, no, I'm not going to be able to do that, or I'm not able to step in. You're right that I have a very demanding job that requires a lot of time. The interesting thing about this kind of job is that there's both sort of the substantive work you do, but then there's a lot of ceremonial things you have to do. You have to show up for parties and receptions, which sound really great until you do 10 of those in a week. And you're like, okay, I'm ready to go home. But the nice thing about my job is that, as true for most leadership roles, you actually have a degree of authority over your schedule. Now, I can't control when commencement is held. And so every year at commencement, I got to be there. And so we work really hard to make sure that my girls are not in dance recitals on commencement weekend, and make sure that we don't have sort of family vacations planned for commencement. But I can actually organize a lot of the other work of my life around some of those kind of commitments. So my wife and I have a scheduling meeting every week where she reminds me of what's coming up, and we schedule out like 3 to 6 months ahead. So there's not a lot of impromptu part of my life, but it's turned out to be, it works out fairly well. I also have a wonderful wife who's quite strong-willed, and so she can tell me when I'm getting off track. And so that helps build accountability in my life as well.
No, sounds good. Sounds like there's just a lot of intentionality too, being very intentional in how you organize your time, how you organize your relationships. And you mentioned your wife speaking into you, your friend as well. Sometimes we hear about this being kind of lonely at the top, right? And there's a feeling of loneliness. It sounds like you're very intentional in how you try to develop those relationships. Yeah,
but I will say, I think I am lonely, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
I think part of that comes from the role, because while I have wonderful friendships with people I work with, at the end of the day, I do recognize that in one way or another, I'm the manager. And so it doesn't quite feel like a true, authentic friendship. But I don't have a lot of time for in-depth friendships. And I learned, actually, Pat Gelsinger, who's the CEO of Intel, was one of the people I interviewed. And Pat taught me the importance of being very intentional about developing those friendships and sustaining them. So the fact that I call that friend every Sunday night, that's like a standing appointment that I have. I don't have a lot of those in my life, but they become really important lifelines. Yeah.
That's good. Good. Question in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Jennifer. Thanks
Hi,
for coming
Jennifer.
over. And my question is about the volatility of emotions, because you have to deal with a lot of different stakeholders and they have different emotions and that may impact you. And sometimes in the VUCA world, it's very true that we will face a lot of anxiety or fear in situations that we have no control over or limited control. So I heard that you also mentioned that there are some contemplative prayer or meditation practices that may be helpful. So maybe you can share around these areas?
Sure. There's a really wonderful book by a philosopher named J.P. Moreland called Finding Quiet. And I commend it to you. It's a great work. I read it in the midst of sort of my own struggle with anxiety. And I found it to be a very helpful set of guides and practices to help me. So learning how to practice contemplative prayer does not come natural to me. I'm an active person, not a contemplative person. And even in my prayers, I'm kind of like, okay, God, here are the things that I need. And so getting to a place of quiet and to being in a more listening and learning mode, that does not come naturally for me. But I found that meditating on passages of Scripture could be very helpful. I actually, there's an app on my phone called Pray As You Go, and it's helpful. It's one that sort of reminds me. It asks a question, reads a passage of Scripture, invites me to think and reflect. And just by having somebody to guide me through that practice, it can be really useful. And so those kinds of things have been very helpful to me. I will also say, I have found prayer to be very important in my life. And there are certainly days that I miss prayer for one reason or another, but generally speaking, I pray every day. And I find having daily routines and practices have a way of creating normalcy in my life. The challenge about leadership is that there is no typical day ever. Like every day is different. And I might start my day at 6 o'clock in the morning, or I might start at 8:30 in the morning, and I might end at 5 o'clock, or I might end at 10 o'clock. And because of that, there's so much variable. So I found that just as every day I'm going to brush my teeth, every day I'm going to eat a meal, so also every day I'm going to have spiritual disciplines, and pretty much every day I'm going to do some form of exercise. There are going to be things that I do that I just prioritize. And so when you begin to develop that, it has a way of helping to create that stability that can serve you when you're dealing with all of the VUCA-ness that's around us. Thank you.
That's good. As you were talking too, Mike, I was thinking it's not only like responding to a VUCA world, but preparing for a VUCA world. You know it's coming. And so you're doing the habits now that might actually help you a year from now when something happens in that. So recommend that Pray As You Go too. That's a good one.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Right here at the front. And then we'll come over to this side.
Hi.
That's you. Yeah, go ahead, please.
My name's Alvina.
Hi.
And hi, I have a question about stress. So in a VUCA world, you'll be experiencing a lot of stress.
Yep.
How do you think and speak or communicate with clarity when you're actually under a lot of stress, or you're put on a very stressful situation on the spot?
It's interesting about stress because everybody responds to stress slightly differently. And actually, if you can take a little bit of time to take stock of how you process stress, it actually helps you to do it more effectively over time. Research shows you actually need stress to develop the kind of psychological habits that will serve you well. Character formation only occurs in the context of some form of stress. Just as you must have resistance to develop muscles on your biceps, so also you must have resistance to develop the kind of character that you're wanting. The problem is that you don't want that resistance or that stress to become debilitating. And so you have to pay attention to what are those practices. So for example, in my own life, when I'm feeling particularly stressed at work, I need things to be very neat at home. So I tidy up things in the kitchen, or I make sure that things are very straight and organized. There is something about my own life that I do better with stress when my desk does not feel chaotic. Now, other people, when they're stressed, they let the chaos come on because it's just one less thing for them to worry with. But you have to figure out what it is that works for you. And then you need to communicate with your family. Hey, this is how I deal with stress. So don't give me a hard time when I'm tidying up, because that's actually how I'm processing what I'm dealing with. And I think a large part of navigating and managing stress is to be able to understand your tolerance for it. Now, in every situation, what happens is that you have a sort of baseline level of stress that just becomes normal. And so you can actually take on more stress after you've developed how to manage that. That's actually what happens in leadership. The thing that's really hard is when you go from a very junior position to a very senior position, which is what happened in my own life. I went from being just a regular straight old professor to being president of an institution. I wasn't a department chair, I wasn't a dean, I wasn't a vice president. It was a crazy leap. And I found that the stress of the role was very challenging. So I went from, I used to be able to manage my life to, I can't manage anything in my life. And I made it for 9 months. And then I was almost to my breaking point. So when you study leaders, the good thing is that you can call upon them to give you advice. So I went to go see a guy named Ralph Larson, who was the CEO of Johnson & Johnson. And I told him my problem. And he helped me discover that the real problem I was facing was that my job involved a lot of travel. At the time, I would travel 25 to 30% of the time. And when I would go to travel to a city, I would have a very full agenda. I'd start with a breakfast meeting at 8 o'clock. I'd then have a series of morning appointments. Then I'd have lunch with somebody. Then I'd have a couple of afternoon appointments. And then I'd have dinner with somebody. And then I'd get back to my hotel at like 9 o'clock at night. But I had 125 emails in my inbox. And a lot of those emails actually required me to respond because other people were waiting on my response to do their job the next day. And so I would be working until like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was completely overwhelmed. And he said, you need to hire somebody to be your traveling buddy, somebody who could actually travel with you and help you manage your daily responsibilities in real time so that your inbox has 10 items at the end of the day, not 125 items. And so I am traveling with Noah Huseman back there, who is my traveling buddy.
Noah Huseman in the back there.
Yes.
Welcome, Noah.
So Noah is my traveling buddy that Ralph Larson said I needed to develop. And I had no idea that I needed it. But that's an example of how you have to get to a point where you say, I can't really sustain this stress. I need to come up with a solution. And oftentimes, having folks who are more experienced who can sort of advise you, because the solutions oftentimes can actually help take that stress level down a good bit. Yeah, thank you.
That's good. That's great. Had a question? Do we have a question over here? Maybe one in the middle back there. Just a little detail here. Noah was the pitcher on the Taylor University baseball team. Throws a baseball 93 miles an hour.
Indeed.
So there you go. Glad you're with us, Noah. So, yes, question. Where are we? Where's the mic? Just right over here. Yeah. In the middle. There you go. Yes.
Thanks very much. My name is Hugh, and my question is, there has been the news of a rise of anxiety in the younger generation. And I was just wondering why you think that might be and how the different generations have been dealing with this world differently, whether there is a difference in how they've been dealing with it.
There's so many benefits of the digital revolution that we have seen over the last 25 years or so. But I think that anxiety and depression are directly caused by the spread of digital devices that are particularly given to folks at too young an age to be able to process what they're observing. And social media, for all of the good things that come or can come through social media, connectivity, being able to be informed, have a place to share your voice, all these are good things. But I think that they have been thrust upon young people before they have the ability to process all that they experience. So my twin daughters, Emily and Caroline, are 14, and they are the last students in their grade who do not have a phone. And I bet every night I hear how terrible we are as parents because we do not allow them to have a phone. And to be honest, there are parts that I would love for them to have a phone. I'd love to be able to find a friend and to know where they are. It would be so much more convenient for me to be able to call them when I want them to help me with something. And I'd appreciate some of those kind of benefits. But the research has just shown that particularly young women have a very difficult time with anxiety, and there's a strong correlation to early exposure to social media. And so my wife and I have decided that we are holding out until 16 is what we're doing. So I have 2 more years of those nightly debates about the rise of digital devices. And that's not the only issue, but it is certainly a part of it. And I found in my own life that some of the news that I was exposed to and some of the social media accounts actually was creating my own anxiety. So I actually don't even manage my own social media accounts. As a university president, you need to have some kind of a presence, but I choose not to read it because I was finding it just made me perpetually anxious. And oftentimes, people give thoughtless comments that they really are not very informed that can be pretty hurtful to you when you're leading. And so I found that was one way that I could eliminate some of that own anxiety in my life. So those kinds of things can be helpful practices. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll just take a couple of more. Yeah, right here.
Hi, my name is Sky, and speaking of young women, I wanted to understand a little bit, in your research, how many of the leaders that you talked to were female? And did you see much of a difference in the way that they were leading in a VUCA world?
A very smart question from a Taylor University alumnus who's here in Hong Kong, Sky. I appreciate that. I worked so hard to get every woman in my study because there were actually very few. So about 10% of the study responses were women. And part of that is because I was working for very, very senior positions. So to get into my study, you basically had to be the president, CEO, or chair of a large enterprise, a nonprofit or a business, or hold an equivalent position of senior status in government. I did have some amazing women. I interviewed Ann Fudge, who was the CEO of Young and Rubicon, one of the greatest advertising companies in the world. I interviewed Drew Faust, the president of Harvard, Condoleezza Rice, who had been national security advisor, Ann Mulcahy, who had been the CEO of Xerox. So there were a number of extraordinary women, but there are not many women in senior leadership roles. And so I was particularly interested in that. So in View from the Top, I dedicate a section to talking about why are there so few women in leadership. Now, today things are better than they were, and there are a number of different initiatives and strategies that have helped women to move into leadership. But there is one pernicious problem that really stays with us that we have to think about our practices and our policies that relate to it, and it's because the primary years of professional ascent, your 20s and 30s, exactly measure the primary childbearing years. And still to this day, it's women who bear children. Yeah. And so, because of that, oftentimes women have to make a decision of, am I going to have children early on and then find ways to manage the parenting responsibilities while I move up in the professional world? Or a lot of professional women decide that they're going to delay childbearing for 10, 15 years while they're on their professional ascent, and then maybe take a sabbatical or time out for them to be an engaged mom or find ways to parent with their husbands to be able to manage that. That's probably one of the key issues. Now, we've done a lot of good things with parental leave, for example. That's become a lot more common in a lot of companies and a lot of organizations that create more space for women, mothers, and for fathers to be able to take some time off for the parenting duties and responsibilities. But that's probably one of the real key challenges that we face. I also found, oddly enough, that the women who were in senior leadership were oftentimes overtaxed. What I mean by this is I interviewed Marty Evans. So Marty Evans was the first female admiral in the U.S. Navy. And she eventually served in corporate America, was on a number of different boards. She was the commissioner for the LPGA, the Ladies Professional Golf Association. Interesting woman who's had many different roles. But Marty Evans was tapped for so many different roles because oftentimes she was the only woman in the room of senior leadership. And so these women who were in leadership were oftentimes feeling stretched because they were being asked to do a wide variety of different roles. And so that's part of why we have to see more women in senior leadership. And it's important for us to have programs and initiatives to help women emerging leaders to be able to rise to those senior leadership roles later on. Good question.
Good. Why don't we do this? We're going to kind of wrap up here now, and then, but Michael's going to be available just for a few minutes afterwards if you want to introduce yourself, give a card to him, or whatever, have a a particular short question you have for him. I want to give you just a few moments to think about if there's any last thing you want to say to us. I want to give you the last word here tonight. And then I'll just kind of, as you're thinking about that, just tell the group a little bit about some things that are coming up. One is if you're a faculty here at HKU, we're going to have a gathering on the 30th of this month. So if you're a faculty here, you're welcome. Also spread the word. We'd love to find it. You can have that QR code there, or you can also just see me afterwards. Also, just coming up, we're going to have a number of things. This is our last lecture of this academic year, but we try to have 2 or 3 lectures every semester, 6 over a year. So if you get that QR code there, and if you're not on our mailing list, please join us. It just takes a couple of seconds there, and then we can send you ongoing details of things that are coming up. So, but Michael, any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with us?
You know, I found the people who have been the most successful at navigating the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in their lives and in their leadership did a few simple things that perhaps would be of good encouragement to all of us. Number one is that they were folks who had built a network of friends and loved ones who could hold them accountable and be important sources of support. Leadership is a very challenging job. And so to the extent there's somebody in your life that's in leadership, I hope you will encourage them. You'd be amazed at how rarely leaders actually receive an encouraging word. Most of our job is to hear the complaints and the frustrations. Someone said to me that the job of the leader is to carry around everyone else's accumulated grievances with their institution. And I think that's probably true. So saying an encouraging word and then being available for that. And if you find yourself in leadership, being intentional of having a support network, I think that makes a huge difference. Number 2 is that I think we have to get to a place where we have regular practices in our life that help us to manage the stress and the challenges. So I've talked about spiritual disciplines that have been really important in my own life. One spiritual discipline that I did not have for a long time that I have developed since then is the practice of fasting. So it's an interesting idea because fasting has been part of church teaching for a very, very long time. And I had read about it in the Bible. Jesus did it for 40 days, and I had never done it a day in my life. So about a decade ago, I began to see that that's an important part of the silence and solitude. Sabbath keeping is in one way or another a form of fasting because you're actually ceasing to work one day a week. Having those kind of regular habits where you can develop those kinds of practices become really important. So it may not be a fast from food, it might be a fast from your digital devices, it might be a fast from watching your favorite TV show, or fasting from some other kinds of parts of your life that give you a chance to be in a different posture. It can be really important in your leadership. And I found those kind of spiritual disciplines made a huge difference for my own life. So as one pilgrim to another, I could say that was really helpful for me. Third and finally, I would just say, is that I've had a wide variety of moments in my leadership. I've certainly experienced a lot of volatility and uncertainty, been part of a lot of complexity and ambiguity. I've made so many mistakes in my leadership. But one of the great things about being a president a second time around, so I'm in my second presidency at a second institution, is that hopefully I don't make the exact same mistakes I made before. And I have found that the great news is that God is a God of redemption. And even the difficult things that you experience, the challenges that you might be facing, when they are placed as an offering unto God, can be a source of redemption in our own life. And so if you are facing some element of our VUCA world today and are struggling with it, I would encourage you in your own way to make peace with it by making peace with God. And in the process of that, you might be amazed at how that redemptive twist can actually be part of your own redemptive leadership. And it has certainly been true in my own life, and I hope it might be true for you as well. I love coming to Hong Kong, and I love the chance to interact. I think that this Faith and Global Engagement program is really very special. There are very few things like this in the world. And so I hope you take advantage of the different folks who come, have an opportunity to participate in it. It's been a great joy and honor to be here. Thank you for being here tonight.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, very much. So,
Thank you so much.
Okay, so Mike will be available just for a few minutes. He's got to go off. He's traveling back tomorrow to Taylor, but also has a meeting tonight, so we can be thinking about him. Noah in the back, are there some information about Taylor? Okay, so there'll be a table out on this side. So you can find out about Taylor University, especially about that Ph.D. program in leadership for that. And again, thank you for sharing your life, sharing your heart. He also spoke to the students, as we said, on Saturday night, and just it was an amazing time of just kind of hearing what it takes to be a leader in this world. Thank you so much for giving us your night and your time. And yes, we look forward to seeing you next semester as we start again. Have a good night.